This was done by researchers at The Ohio State University. And they wanted to find out what would happen with married couples if one or both of them had dysregulated blood sugar. What would happen in their relationship, in their ability to connect with each other? And so they wore continuous glucose monitors so they can measure this stuff in real time and see okay, this thing was happening with them when they did this. And by the way, we have to set a preface here. When we're talking about abnormal blood sugar, this is the norm for the majority of people. We have 130 million Americans are diabetic, type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic right now. Right now. It's crazy. 242 million folks are overweight or obese. Right now, 43% of our population is clinically obese. It was said to be 50% within the next 10 years. COVID made that shorter. It's going to be in the next couple of years. So when we're talking about blood sugar abnormality, this is the everyday thing. This was my everyday thing. And so how do we do that? Blood sugar spike through these abnormal foods that we eat and the impending crash, right? You go hypoglycemic. Your body takes low blood sugar very seriously. We're talking about primal control because you have to have the ability to fight or flee. So it needs to get that blood sugar back to normal. It can do it. The way it does it is the release of catecholamines, right? So stress hormones that, okay, we got blood sugar back to normal, but the side effect is that it can make you more irritable and even aggressive. And so what they found was that, sure enough, when people's blood sugar was abnormal and too low, they tended to be more aggressive towards their partner. They tended to not be able to put themselves in the other person's shoes, a perspective take. And this is the biggest takeaway. They were far less likely to resolve their relationship conflict.
Hey friends, welcome back. So today you are in for a real treat. Shawn Stevenson is the best-selling author of Eat Smarter and Sleep Smarter. I will put links to those amazing books and well-referenced books I might add below. He also hosts the podcast, The Model Health Show, which has been top ranked for a number of years, longer than I've been in this podcast game, which is why I want to kind of give you this little introduction, because I've interviewed quite a few big names over the years. I've been very grateful and blessed to interview New York Times bestselling authors and people that you see on TV and all this stuff. And I will say that after spending 5 hours with Shawn, he's one of the most real and authentic people that I've had the chance to spend time with. And I'm just grateful for voices like him and people like him. So I saw how he interacted with his kids and treated his employees and treated me as a guest. He wasn't looking at his watch, trying to rush things or trying to get me in and out or paying attention to his phone. It was like eye contact, good body language. And so what you're going to hear today is a really authentic nutrition conversation. So we're going to focus on some of the core issues in our society, how we underemphasize the importance of nutrition. And Shawn and I both come from similar backgrounds in the sense that we grew up eating junk food, and he had a much more severe injury than I did. And our injuries changed how we approach, nutrition and emphasize nutrition. So he has a really great story, compelling story, and he just finished the book and published the book, Eat Smarter. So he has references that are just flying off the top of his head. And I want you to focus in on some of these references, and I will put links to some of those below in the show notes. But we talk a lot about how nutrition impacts behavior, thought processes, irrational beliefs, and microaggressions, and because these things are in the media right now. There's a lot of talk about police reform and gun violence and the criminal justice system. And he has some amazing references and insights about how nutrition impacts predisposition towards violent behavior, even within relationships, where he highlights one study from Ohio State University that basically found that blood sugar oscillations and volatility are linked with challenges within couples in their relationships. And we know that 50% of marriages fail. A lot of kids are being abused. And so if we can get this message out there that nutrition makes up and impacts how we think and how we behave in our inflammatory burden, our predisposition towards this virus, our outcomes, and our relationships, that is the message that we should be conveying. So I really think you'll enjoy this conversation. And he did a great documentary on face masks, which we get into towards the end. So check out the show notes, the timestamps below, because I think you'll really, really enjoy it. Now, today's show is brought to you by our very own Myoscience Nutrition. So as you listen to this, it's early spring. We know that the days are getting longer. Summer is upon us. But I found in my clinical practice, going back to 2007 in Colorado, where there's 300 sunny days plus per year and people are active and outdoors, vitamin D deficiency is still rampant. You might be sending your kids to a summer camp, and maybe you're not big into sunscreen, but the camp counselor is putting sunscreen on, or grandma's putting sunscreen on your children. So you still, I think, especially if you have darker skin or if you're not getting midday sun exposure, you need to support your body's vitamin D levels. So we have a range of a suite of vitamin D products, a high potency liquid, a combination product that's paired with one of vitamin D's cofactor, vitamin K2, that's specifically the MK7 form of K2, called essential fatty nutrients. And we have a high potency soft gel in organic, extra virgin, non-GMO olive oil. So I like to give the liquid to my daughter and give it to my dog too. Vets will tell you your pets need vitamin D as well. We don't think about that much, but your pets need vitamin D. I've been giving my dog vitamin D for a long time. You can support your families and your own vitamin D levels by going over to our website, myoscience.com. That's MYOXCIENCE.com, myoscience.com. And what I'll do is I'll put a link below to all the vitamin D suites, and you can use the coupon code podcast at checkout to save on any of our third-party tested vitamin D formulations so that you can support your body's whole body vitamin D health all year round, whatever the season is, when you're traveling, whatever else. We have a lot of options for you. So let's cut back to it with Shawn and talk about nutrition. Then we're going to get into the brain, and we're going to get into masking and how to think better, because we know that SARS-CoV-2 is not going to be the last potential pandemic of our lifetime, and it's going to be endemic, which means it's not going away. It's going to stay in our communities, unfortunately. So we have to be healthy. So here we go with Shawn Stevenson. Well, Shawn, it's great to be with you. As I was telling you when we were recording for your show, man, we think alike, and I just want to feature you and talk about your work. Your documentary on masks was just amazing, and I think that really woke a lot of people up, you know. But let's sort of unpack your story a little bit, and you breaking your hip. And I love in your book, you know, you'll think this story is funny. So you talk about your lunchbox, the metal lunchbox your grandmother gave to you. And I just got an email, like I was reviewing, you know, prepping for the show last night. I got an email from my kid's school. She's 8 years old, that lunchboxes are no longer allowed in the school because they might transmit coronavirus. Wow. So what we need to have it needs to be just plastic. Yeah. So kids can't even bring lunchboxes. And the rationale in the email was because if another child, heaven forbid, touches my child or your child's lunchbox, they will transmit germs. And I thought, man, we got to start there because it's crazy. But we'll get into masking and the virome and human microbiome. But you were 15 years old. You were running on the track. What happened? Oh, my goodness.
And by the way, I made a joke. When I wrote this book, 2 years ago when I wrote that chapter, I made a joke about lunchboxes being outlawed. Yeah. Not so funny anymore, is it?
It's crazy.
Yeah, so 15 years old, from the environment that I come from, I have two very distinct, different childhood experiences. One was living with my grandmother, very safe community, 1 block to walk to school, certainty, routines, love, safety, all of the things that you would think is just nurturing for a good human being, a human spirit. And then my grandfather got sick, being a part of, conventional medicine and multiple open heart surgeries. His physician telling him just when he had a brief incident happen, no more butter, start using his country crock and all these different dietary changes, and end up leading to worse health outcomes. So I saw this firsthand. But he wanted to move back to Piedmont, Missouri, which was like in literally the quote country, dirt road, all that stuff just to get to their house. And my mother had a choice, like, am I gonna go live in Piedmont, Missouri, where I really stand out, especially for folks who see me on video. I'm not the country kind of, framework. I definitely be the minority in the situation. And so I went to live with my mother and my stepfather, and this was poverty, but when I struggle to even say poverty, because here in the United States, poverty is very different from other places in the world. You still got a TV. We still had a Nintendo. We didn't get it when it came out, but maybe a year later, maybe you got a car, which, the true story, my mom would get cars from a place called OK Junk Cars.
Wow.
True story. And so even though we didn't have much, we still were okay. And part of that was government assistance, food stamps, WIC. We also got food from charities, from food pantries. And little did I know that I was already being conditioned in my environment what I was going to be eating. But the big piece was, for me coming from that environment, I never met a person who went to college, let alone graduated from college, except for like teachers at school. It just wasn't something I saw. I might know like a friend whose cousin went to college on a football scholarship. So I'm like, okay, I love sports. I'm going to go to college playing sports. And so that was my aspiration. I was a hood legend, man. Yeah. I was a hood legend. We're always playing sports, always competing. And when we got to high school, everything looked great. I scored a bunch of touchdowns, kick return, punt return, all that good stuff, but also track season. I ran a 4.5 when I was 15 years old.
Wow.
All right. So that's like combine time, but it was at track practice that this scenario you just mentioned, I was doing a time trial with my coach, and there's just one other person I'm running against. And I'm coming off the curve into the straightaway. And then all of a sudden I just felt this kind of like, my body just kind of shut down. And I just came up limping. I was in pain, but just kind of more confused, like what's going on? Like my leg's not moving or firing. And come to find out, I broke my hip. And I was just running. Nobody hit me, no trauma. I didn't fall. My hip broke, my iliac crest, the tip of my hip just broke off, which I didn't find out until later. Wow. Which, we went to the physician. He took an x-ray, and then there, I can see it so clearly. My bone was just kind of floating off in space away from the rest of my body. He's like, oh, there's the issue. And from that moment, what I experienced and what I've grown to see consistently being a big issue today is standard of care, which is I was given some NSAIDs. I was advised to stay off the leg, given some crutches. And I even had a treatment that is a little bit on the fringe, which was ultrasound treatment, which, by the way, sound used as a treatment for disease, or a sound used for treatment. It's literally sound. That's what I think we can miss it because the word just comes off the tongue.
It's all clustered together.
But it's literally using sound as a treatment. And there's studies we have now on using sound to actually break down cancer tumors, and the list goes on and on. We can talk on end about that. But, so I did have that, but I went on about my business. I'm 15 years old. So it's just like, you've got things in your favor, and you're just like, you'll get better. And I did on the surface. But nobody stopped to ask, how did a 15-year-old kid break his hip from running? It doesn't make sense. That is so abnormal. And it wasn't until 5 years later. And by the way, so I got back eventually. I missed pretty much the rest of the track season. Next football season, I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go. I've got game films. Well, they're downstairs now, but in my old house, it was upstairs, where you can see me breaking away on, I'm running a 39 sweep, going on the outside. I get past the linebackers, past the defensive back. I'm 5-10 yards ahead of everybody, 5 feet from the end zone, and I just break down. I just come up limping and fall into the end zone. And I pull a muscle, I tear this, I do that. I just kept falling apart. And it wasn't until I was 20. And by the way, so my aspirations for playing at the next level, as good as I might have been, were just demolished. Like I couldn't stay on the field. And so finally, 20 years old, I get this diagnosis, which was degenerative disc disease, so my spine, the disc in between my vertebrae, and also degenerative bone disease, arthritic condition of my bones. Basically just my bone density was incredibly low. And the crazy thing was I was guzzling milk. I was watching the commercials. I had the milk mustache, but it just wasn't doing the trick. And I was grateful to get that diagnosis, because now, and I was used to working with my trainers. I was just like, okay, how do we fix it? And I was just like, my eyes are big and just ready. And my physician at the time, he put the MRI out for me to look at. And, after he told me the diagnosis, okay, you have degenerative disc disease, I'm just like, still, I don't know what it means. And I didn't even know why I was having pain in my leg. That's what brought me in. I was like, why are we taking pictures of my spine? Like, how does this, I didn't get it. And so I asked him, what do I do to fix it? And he said, I'm just paraphrasing. He was like, I'm sorry, son, this is incurable. There's nothing you can do about this. It didn't register to my mind the first time, because I asked him again. I was like, okay, so, and this question, I don't know where it came from, but possibly because I did already have my nutritional science class in college. So I asked him, does this, in which I was wildly miseducated, by the way. I asked him, does this have anything to do with what I'm eating? Should I change the way I'm exercising? And he looked at me like I was from another planet. Like he was like, this is not, these are his words. This has nothing to do with what you're eating. This is something that just happens. And I'm sorry that it happened to you. We're going to get you some medication. We're going to get you a back brace, and we're going to, help you to manage this. And, he sent me on my way. And I went from going in with a nuisance of a pain to within 2 weeks having chronic debilitating pain, which lasted for the next 2 years. Every single moment of my life, even while I was sleeping, I hardly slept because the pain would wake me up. It was so bad. Just changing positions, I'd get this sciatic electrocution down my leg. And so I had to take medication to sleep. I took medication, I was on Celebrex, and I was on, over-the-counter stuff. I was on all these different medications just to try to exist with 1 minute without pain.
Wow.
And I'm a kid. I was 20 years old. And what happened at the time is, and this is so important in this conversation, in any conversation about health, is the nocebo effect. And a lot of folks know about the placebo effect, but they don't really know. Mm-hmm. When we're doing clinical trials, we have to account for the effectiveness of the placebo because it's so damn effective. On average, placebos, on average in clinical trials, are somewhere around 33% effective in clinical trials. So somebody believing that they're taking a medication to lower their blood pressure or to heal their meniscus, or, it's not just, placebo pills, it's also placebo treatments, surgeries, where they'll put a video up of somebody else's knee surgery and the person having no therapeutic thing is done, just an incision, sewn back up, but they heal based on, and this is all documented, cancer, the same goes on and on and on. Some placebos are even upwards of 80% effective.
Wow.
And the question is why? And this is getting back to why standard of care is so deficient, is not asking why. Why is it so effective? What is the mechanism? Is it just this spontaneous remission? It's a very simple principle. The human mind is literally like a pharmacy. It's really the most powerful pharmacy in our reality, because it's not even bioidentical, it's identical. It's making chemicals just for you. Every thought we have has correlating chemistry released into our body. Every single thought, conscious and unconscious. That's the key, because there's a million times more unconscious data that's going on that is based on really our perception, our experience in the world, that's constantly producing the chemistry, the biochemistry that we're experiencing. So even right now, we could be having a good vibe, good time, but I could think about something stressful or something that makes me pissed off, and it immediately changes my chemistry. I start producing more catecholamines. I start producing this and that. Other things get shut down. Maybe, DHA gets shut down, or whatever the case might be. It changes my chemistry based on my thinking. This is where medicine really, this is the tip of the spear. This is really the foundation of everything. It controls everything else. And I love this. Earlier, you mentioned this, that our body is what gives a response. Even when we have an intervention, some kind of a drug, it's still our body that does the thing. And that's what's so overlooked. It's our body's decision to even interact with the thing, because our body can just decide not to, truly, And when I'm saying that, I'm saying, for example, in the context of calories, which is what I was inundated with in college. And this is the last little thing that I'll share. In my nutritional science class, very first day of school, I was taught by my professor that if you can manage calories, you can manage your metabolism. If you manage calories, you can manage your weight. If you manage calories, you can manage your health. He was bordering on obesity. My physician who gave me the diagnosis that I couldn't get better was obese. And it's not that they were blatantly trying to be unhealthy. They were often doing the things that they believed to be correct. Right. But it's just, for me, I'm just like, how's it working out for you? What is the result? And what we were taught is this paradigm that calories control our biology. And it's just one metric. And it was a recently discovered metric. There's a time when people just ate food, And there's some value there. And we could talk about epicaloric control for sure. We got to talk about that today. But my point being this, researchers at Yale University did some really fascinating research, and they uncovered that hypothalamic inflammation is one of the biggest issues going on right now, with neuroinflammation, period. And your brain is in constant contact and connection with your gut, obviously. We know about the vagus nerve and that communication. But based on your brain's assessment and your gut's assessment of the supplies you have, your brain can literally just tell your gut to dramatically reduce the absorption of calories from your food, dramatically reduce the absorption of whatever minerals, just based on the assessment. What if this assessment is screwed up? Yeah. Because of neuroinflammation, because of all these factors that cause it? So this is really and this is the end of the story. I'm wildly miseducated about these things, but I asked him, does this have anything to do with what I'm eating? That was the question that I posed my physician. And when he said that there was nothing to do with my food and there's nothing that I can do about it, he was the authority figure. Right. So it bypassed, when you think about a nocebo, that's getting a negative injunction that something bad is going to happen. And in my clinical practice, I saw this almost every day. People were coming in, I was told that this is incurable. I have to be on this medication forever. I'll never walk again. I've even worked with people. They said I have, 6 months to live at most. And I've got stories for days. But anyways, but that nocebo effect, clinically proven, and there's even studies right now. And if people just want to go to Dr. Google and type in nocebo and COVID, for example, the ramifications, psychoneuroimmunology in COVID, psychosomatic effects of COVID, and just look at the data. This is well-known stuff, but most people, the average person, even in clinical settings, don't really know. And so here's the bottom line. It took me, some people never get it. Some people are slow learners. Some people get it instantaneously. It took me 2 years and 4 different physicians, which I always recommend. If you get a bad bill of goods, a bad diagnosis, and it's not like, because the system has a tendency to pressure you into treatment. And if you walked in your own volition and you can walk out of there, get a second or third opinion before you have a life-altering procedure, or you get onto a life-altering, potentially dangerous medication. Just get another opinion. But the key is get an opinion from somebody who has the same goal as you.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's on your wavelength.
Yeah. If your goal is to not be on metformin or lisinopril, and they're just saying this is the only choice, talk with another person who has a different perspective. And so finally, after 4 physicians, all giving me the same, but they're in the same kind of class of thought, I realized that this whole time I've been outsourcing my potential. I've been outsourcing my capability to them. And I was habitually asking my unconscious question, and even conscious, was, why me? Why me? Every single day for 2 years. Why me? Why is this happening to me? Why won't somebody help me? And if you know anything about the human mind, there's this process that's called instinctive elaboration. And it's a mental reflex. Any question you pose the mind, it has to find the answer. This is why TV shows are so good at like getting those open loops and keeping you the cliffhangers. You got to find out what happened. And so questions really are the answer. If you ask a question, your brain is filtering this infinite amount of data to kind of isolate and find the things that you really hold top of mind. And so once I realized that I'd been outsourcing my health, and they told me like nobody can help me, and my life was in such shambles, I gained a bunch of weight at this point as well, because I wasn't doing anything at all at this point. And I finally asked a different question, and it wasn't on purpose, but I asked, okay. And I had this thought, this is the cherry on top. I thought about the physician that I just saw, maybe the day before, who told me that I can't get better. And I thought about him as I was sitting on the edge of my bed with my pill bottle in my hand. I thought about him hanging out with his family and like having dinner, and I'm here in the dark. But it's like, hello, darkness, my friend. It's like one of those, it's like a gloomy scenario. And I'm just thinking about the light that he's seeing. And it's just like, it wasn't that I was mad at him. I was just like, he's not thinking about me. I'm here by myself, and he's not thinking about me. I have to do something myself. I have to take responsibility. I can't keep outsourcing my health to people who tell me they can't help me. So I ask, what can I do to get better? Simple question, changed everything. What can I do to get healthy? My discs are degenerating. What are my discs made of? And into the story, over the course of the next about 2 months, the pain I've been experiencing every day of my life had me in total fear, was gone. And 9 months later, when I finally got a scan done. But at that point, my life had totally transformed. But I had to go in for my own affirmation. My 2 herniated discs had retracted, and my degeneration was gone. Like I could see the light shining through my disc again, where they were like black prior. He said I had the spine of an 80-year-old man previously, and now the last physician I saw was just standing there holding his chin. And this is the exact words he said. He's like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
He didn't even want to know. He's just
whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Wow. And that was, but through that process is when my passion, my career really got started, because people at the university that I was going to started coming up to me and asking me for help. My fellow students, professors, these all became, and for me, the low-hanging fruit was strength and conditioning coach, personal trainer. So I did that, shifted all my coursework back to biology and nutritional science, and eventually opened my nutritional science. My clinic, and working with folks doing consulting work for businesses and individuals for many years. And now I'm here with you, man.
That's awesome. I love that. I mean, people talk about the gift of injury, and I think you have an open mindset. So I hurt my back too and hurt my shoulder younger. And we think like this is, you can approach it from two different scenarios. Like I'm done, I suck, I'm a victim, whatever. And it sounds like went through some of that, but then you realize like, no, I can change my situation. What do you think? Because there's a lot of people out there who are on multiple medications, polypharmacy, multimorbidity, multiple conditions. What is it? Do you think it's as, and I don't want to say every situation is different, but asking that question so that your prefrontal cortex is constantly searching for answers, like what else could it be? Do you think that's a way to help people?
Yeah, of course. This is the funny thing about, if you're really good in this field, this is for me, I'm a big proponent of results. Like, just show me the results. Like, if you're working with people and your specialty is diabetes, how many people are coming in that are diabetic and then they're no longer diabetic by working with you? Yeah. I don't care how many degrees you have. What does the result say? Or are you just helping people to sustain by putting them on metformin, putting them on insulin, and not actually helping them and teaching them how to actually not have which this is a big issue with medicine, is that it's a labeling system, right? What it really is, these are conditions in the body, and then we give this very broad labeling. No two diabetes are the same. That's the thing too. If we get into the conversation about, we all really have a unique metabolic fingerprint. And I don't know how I happened upon this understanding. I'm grateful that I did very early on. But before that, I was doing the same things. I was thinking that whatever I'm doing, my clients are going to be doing as well. If vegan's working, you're going to be vegan. If paleo's working, you're going to be paleo. This is what the end all be all is. Eventually, I realized everybody is unique. They need different things at different times. Yeah. Because that's the thing too. Our metabolism, our unique metabolic fingerprint that we have right now, no one else in human history has ever had. And our metabolism next week isn't even the same as it is today. It's constantly in flux. And so when working with people and asking them and encouraging them to really think about these things. So this is the point is, people, if you actually are good at this, you ask questions and you listen. Because people already know the cause and cure of what the issue is. They know. It's just being able to vocalize it, being able to think about it themselves. And when they do it versus you telling them what the problem is, it's like a different dimension of empowerment. And, especially for guys too, like in my clinical practice, I just realized these little things. And also women coming in would be like, it's just my husband won't listen, I'm trying to do this thing. And, we have a slight tendency more so to be like, we know it already. Mm-hmm. So it's more, again, allowing the revelation to happen within them because they already know the answer. So absolutely, being able to ask questions and being able to encourage people to do their own inner reflection and self-assessment, it's so remarkable, the changes that can happen.
It's so true. Yeah, I love where this is going because the mind is so powerful. And you kind of started off with the idea of being in a bad environment is psychologically stressful. So I would love to sort of talk about that because we're hearing a lot of disparities in health and outcomes based upon skin color or income level. There's a lot of that. How much do you think, because obviously you and I, we talk a lot about food and we can get in, and I definitely want to get into food and the microbiome. But mindset and stress, like if you have food scarcity or insecurity, or I had an older sibling that beat the crap out of me, like going home was scary, right? Yeah. How much, you have a book on sleep, this is great, right? There's so many things that we have access to, but that background stress, whether it's poverty, violence, rape, whatever, how much do you think that, if we could kind of quantify, like how much is that playing into people's health issues?
I'm grateful for you. This is such a good question. And oftentimes we have a system that tends to blame the individual. I didn't know that what I was doing was causing, because the bottom line is the degenerative diseases that I was having was because I was making my body out of the worst possible things. It wasn't even really food. I mean, I ate processed foods every meal. Right. I ate fast food every day because it was cheap and it was accessible. We didn't have a lot of money. And if my mom would go and sell her blood to get $20, $25 to feed us. And with that $20, you're not going to get organic rotisserie and some fresh asparagus. And That's not going to get you very far to feed a family of 5, really 4, predominantly mostly her and my brother and sister and me. You're going to go to McDonald's because you can feed all of us twice over, maybe 3 times over with that same $20. Mm-hmm. And that gets into the conversation about how is it possible? How is it possible that something is so cost intensive when we're talking about a Happy Meal, where you got a cheeseburger, fries, the amount of processing and detail and collaboration with companies to make that cheeseburger is insane.
It's crazy, man.
The fries and the soda and a toy for $2.99. And if I want to go to the grocery store and get an avocado, it can likely be $2.99 as well, depending on where you go. 1 avocado, whole Happy Meal. How is that possible? Literally, the avocado can fall off a tree. It takes so much to make this Happy Meal. How is it even remotely possible? And this gets into conversations of elasticity of demand. But one of the big issues, and this is the kind of foundational issue here, is government intervention and government subsidies. And so there was one study that I outlined in Eat Smarter, looking at the data from 1995 to 2010, really tracking about $200 billion invested by the US government into our biggest predominant factory farm crops that predominantly show up through the fast food window and in processed foods. So corn, wheat, factory farm beef. So they're literally paying for these things. And so this study, and this was published in JAMA, one of the most prestigious journals here, the Journal of the American Medical Association. And they tracked, because I had the question, okay, we know that this might be a problem. What is the outcome? Is there an outcome? Has anybody tracked it? They did. So they tracked the consumption of these government subsidized foods, the people who had the most, low income, minority. And they discovered that the people who had the highest consumption of these government subsidized foods had a 40% greater incidence of being obese. Mm-hmm. It's right there in black and white. Our government, the way that things are set up, is literally feeding the problem of obesity and hypertension and cancer and diabetes, and the list goes on and on and on. And when I say the government, there's like a matrix of answers here, because what that really means is us. We're paying for that.
Right. They don't have a business of their own too.
That's right. That means we're paying for, we're investing in disease and we don't realize it. And now here's also the other part, and we talk about this too, and that's what I'm so grateful for about what you do, is like, there's still context here. There's still leaning into understanding our biases and understanding, like, this government program of subsidies might have even started with a good intention of feeding Americans, right? But over time, it's become more and more malicious, and a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent is now given to the farming of fruits and vegetables. And the vast majority is given to these factory farm crops that are used primarily to make fast food and soda and all of these things that are killing us. And so I was born into that situation. And when I'm born into the situation, I don't know that there's anything else. I just think that it's normal. Like, I don't know there's a difference between, rotisserie chicken and a chicken nugget. It's just food. And so I'm making my body out of the chicken nuggies. I'm making my body out of the double big gulp. I'm making my body out of, the Hostess snack cakes. I'm making my body out of these things every day, every single day. And then wondering why I get diagnosed with the disease of a much older person when I was just a kid. I broke my hip. When you think about breaking your hip, you usually think about a senior citizen. And a lot of folks don't realize most people don't fall and break their hip. They break their hip, then fall. Mm-hmm. For that. Right? And so that's what happened with me. I broke my hip and then I almost fell. I stumbled, And what it really boils down to is the fact that in this context of coming into this environment, we have a problem with blaming the victim in a sense. Like, why don't you just pick yourself up, get yourself healthier? My mother sold her blood. My mom worked her ass off. My mom worked overnight at a convenience store and became the manager at the convenience store just to put food on the table, trying to make a better way for us. But at that convenience store, the convenience store was held up. She was stabbed multiple times. She almost died. And the doctor told her if it wasn't for the fact that she was overweight, she would have died. Her being fat, Her obesity saved her life. Do you think she's going to be trying to lose weight ever again?
Wow.
When it saves your life? I come from that. So I understand from a much deeper perspective what it looks like. But here's the key. There is a level of personal responsibility. But for that to be invoked, we have to have the awareness that it exists in the first place. So this is why I'm such a big proponent, and my mission is exposure. Providing exposure to the people who generally don't get it. And it's coming in a language and from a person that they have some connective tissue with. And so I've been, it's so crazy, like with Sleep Smarter, it became an international best-selling book. It started this movement of sleep wellness books. It was the first one. We actually, the publisher rushed it to market because they found out about Ariana Huffington's book coming out. And funny enough, she used my earlier version of Sleep Smarter in reference. When I talked with her, she was like, "Of course, Shawn, I know you." I can't do her voice very well, but she was like, "I know about your Sleep Smarter book." And but I had no idea. I was just trying to address an issue that I was seeing in my clinical practice. We got your nutrition pretty dialed in. We got your movement practices. Why are we not getting your blood sugar normalized when 80% of other people we did? Sleep was a huge gap in the conversation. Mm-hmm. So now being able to have these books in the market, Eat Smarter, national campaign with Target stores, every Target store in America, people who don't get access can see this and get this information in a way that makes sense and empowers them. So exposure, accessibility, but this gets into the conversation. So we've got bottom-up change, which is personal responsibility, education, exposure, and empowerment, like making it fun, because it really feeling. You know this. You could tell everybody. It really is awesome to feel good. Like
totally. It's next level. It changes your whole life. Everyone wants to be healthy.
Yeah, that's the thing. So that's part of it. So being able to like really tap into how awesome and fun it is to feel good and to enjoy food but the other part is structural change. So now we know $200 billion going to government subsidies. That's just one part. That's just one aspect. What if we funnel the money in a more advantageous way? Because the result of that is a $4 trillion healthcare system that continues to, every decade, everything keeps getting exponentially worse. It's not working. So having some of the funds allocated in an intelligent way, which that gets in the conversation about policy and how do we change policy? And we got to understand what we're dealing with here. These organizations are very, very powerful. They're not trying to lose a few billion because you want people to be healthier. And so they're in the pockets. There's the lobbyists. They're influencing policymakers. But these policymakers, I don't think we realize often enough that it's not about their actual intellect or capacity. It's a popularity contest. They're going to do what will get them elected. They're going to appease to the demands of the people who put them in office. So if we demand every press conference, every town hall, what about food? What about the food for our kids? What about the school lunch programs? Every time we get the opportunity. And the crazy thing is, I wrote about this in Eat Smarter, but by writing about it and then this book doing what it's done, I got government officials reaching out to me.
Awesome.
And it's just like, we can change this. We can do this. But the more people that get on board with this, the faster it's going to be.
Which is key. And I mean, people can change their habits. Look at masking. Everyone's wearing masks now, right? So if they can put this thing that's totally unnatural, people don't like to have stuff on their face like you talked about, then they can change what they eat. They can change how they exercise. It's really important. And I think this is even more important because once you change what you eat, you change how you think. I know that when I was eating a lot of junk food, I made a lot of stupid decisions. Like the first time I got arrested was for shoplifting, which I should not have been doing. But I was eating crappy food and I was smoking weed. So we need to get people to be able to think better, right? And we see so much of this blind obedience going on in society. Yeah. And we've kind of talked about, I would love for you to unpack this, and because you did a great podcast all about this, which I'll link in the show notes, the psychosomatic effects of all of the fear mongering. And so we talked about the psychological stress of scarcity, in the hood or poverty, but that neurology is the same if you're scared of a virus or the boogeyman. And what do you think that the ticker counter on CNN, this many hundreds of thousands have died every day. What do you think that's doing to people, and then therefore their food and lifestyle decisions as a result?
Well, you know what? I've got to share this directly because the data exists, and often, as you know, there's going to be most of the data is going to be very vanilla, just one size fits all, very safe assessments, things that are commonly known. But one of the things that I talked about, so psychosomatic condition, just to give a little synopsis on what that looks like, it's essentially a physical illness that's caused or exaggerated by a mental or psychological distress. All right, so physical symptoms caused by psychological distress. This is well known, massive data on this. Stress is a huge component of pretty much every illness we can name. And so with this said, now there's data that exists. There are researchers. This is a beautiful, inspiring part about all this, is that there are researchers who are asking these questions. We might seem like we're in a little bit of we got a little spotlight on us, but there are people who are rational and logical and asking these questions. And so this was published in Brain Behavior and Immunity, peer-reviewed journal, investigating the dynamics of psychoneuroimmunology in COVID-19, right? So psychoneuroimmunology. So we're talking about how our thoughts affect our immune system, right? And how our thoughts affect, with psychoneuroendocrinology, how it affects our hormone production. These fields they're on fire right now. There's so much data coming out in these regards. And so some of the key points in this study revealed that, and these are directly from the study. One, there's been a substantial, unanticipated impact of COVID-19 on the psychological health of both the general community and affected individuals. Two, the fear of COVID-19 and the consequent lockdown and economic crisis has led to globally increased psychological distress. Three, this psychological distress is associated with activated immune inflammatory pathways, especially chronic low-grade inflammation. Four, COVID-19 infections activate immune inflammatory pathways as well. Five, as such, psychological stress appears to increase severe reactions to COVID-19 infections. And COVID-19 infections appear to exacerbate psychological distress. Now, the reason that I said it like I did earlier, unanticipated, it's not unanticipated. This is obvious if you even remotely understand human psychology and biology, not from the cookie cutter, conventional method, which we both went to a conventional university. We're wildly miseducated about what real health looks like. And so you could see this coming from a mile away. I could see this coming. Like, look at all the things we're doing. This is going to have a major impact on our immunity. It's going to suppress our immune system. We're already in fear. The media, which now there's like one of the top guys at one of the big media. I don't even want. Are we dropping names here?
No, it's not. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, well, up to you. You can do whatever.
One of the big ones, like he got caught. Like they had a hot mic and a camera, just like catching him talking about how they actually purposefully structure things to mislead and reframe things in a way that's advantageous to the result that they're trying to get. And he's like, literally, it's not about the truth. It's about the story. It's about framing things how we want. Mm-hmm. And so there are so many studies on this, books on this subject matter. It can be a little nauseating when you get into it. Yeah. The media is driven by manipulation and fear. That's how they keep your attention. This is not about education. It's not even the news. It's the olds, in a sense. It's like the same old shit again and again and again. Fear, fear, fear. Oh, here's a puppy story, like for 1% of the time. Right. And then it's just like, cut back to, well, in other news, that puppy was so cute. In other news, this guy is going to, carjack you tomorrow.
Impending doom. It's always like these really fear-mongering messages. Yeah, totally.
So with this construct, again, we can see it coming from a mile away. Yeah. And I know for a fact, and the data is revealing this, that this has led to far worse health outcomes. But we don't attribute it to that. We just attribute it to the aggressive nature and power of a virus. But it's not about the virus. It's about the environment that it's landing in. That's what it always boils down to. And so we know that there's this hypersusceptibility in folks that are diabetic, hypertensive, obese. One of the most recent CDC studies, 80% of folks who were hospitalized with COVID, obese or overweight. And I shared this with you a little bit earlier, and this is so often looked past, looking in the hospital setting, which is the highest demographic as far as vocations hospitalized with COVID infections, which you would think they're on the front line. That's obvious. But what's not talked about is the fact that 90% of the healthcare workers who were hospitalized with COVID had at least one pre-existing chronic disease. 90%. It's not a freaking accident at that point. 75% were obese. Wow. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's right there in black and white. And yet we did, well, so obesity, whatever.
Because this one healthy triathlete in Michigan got it. So that means everyone can get it. Yeah, people justify it. What's up with that? They want, dude, this sounds crazy, but it's almost like people like living in this fear-based state, I feel like, because they always rationalize something and say, well, yeah, but what about this? What about the long hauler? What about? It's like, what about? What about the fact that if you drive down the road, someone can text and drive and kill you? Like, you still drive your car, right? I mean, so it's weird. And yeah,
it's becoming, because it's a deflection, it's the thing that we see in the media and with politicians. They're just very good at deflecting, and it's becoming a cultural norm for us to do the same thing, to ignore the piece of data in front of you and just do that, well, what about this? What about that? Instead of like, what does the big thing say? The big thing says, if we're obese, we're far more likely to get sick and die. That's the big thing. But we can't get people healthier overnight. It's been over a year. Yeah. I heard that story in the beginning. It's never been the mission of our current system to get people healthier. Right. As a matter of fact, it's feeding sickness. But for you to realize that and really embrace that, it's going to be uncomfortable because, and I've, just being in this field for so long, and I've talked with folks, they don't want to believe that the government official isn't looking out for their best interests. Like it pulls the rug out from under them in their reality that they're safe. And so why is this? Why is it so easy for folks to not be able to think for themselves, to be logical, to look at data and to understand their own biases and to, look at things from other people's perspective? Well, this is such an important conversation, man. This is a big reason why I wrote Eat Smarter, was because of this, if not the number one reason. Of course, food is a big passion of mine. It was my bridge to health, because food isn't just food, it's information. It literally changed me. It changed the way that I was thinking. But what we know today is what I just said isn't just hearsay. And I'll just start with this one little interesting study and we'll dive deeper. But this was done by researchers at the Ohio State University. And they wanted to find out what would happen with married couples if one or both of them had dysregulated blood sugar. What would happen in their relationship, in their ability to connect with each other? And so they wore continuous glucose monitors so they can measure this stuff in real time and see okay, this thing was happening with them when they did this. And what they discovered was that when folks, and by the way, we have to set a preface here. When we're talking about abnormal blood sugar, this is the norm for the majority of people. We have 130 million Americans are diabetic, type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic right now. Right now. It's crazy. 242 million folks are overweight or obese. Right now, 43% of our population is clinically obese. It was said to be 50% within the next 10 years. COVID made that shorter. It's going to be in the next couple of years. So when we're talking about blood sugar abnormality, this is the everyday thing. This was my everyday thing. And so how do we do that? Blood sugar spike through these abnormal foods that we eat and the impending crash. Right? You go hypoglycemic. Your body takes low blood sugar very seriously. We're talking about like primal control, because you have to have the ability to fight or flee. So it needs to get that blood sugar back to normal. It can do it. The way it does it is the release of catecholamines, right? So stress hormones that, okay, we got blood sugar back to normal, but the side effect is that it can make you more irritable and even aggressive. And so what they found was that, sure enough, when people's blood sugar was abnormal and too low, they tended to be more aggressive towards their partner. They tended to not be able to put themselves in the other person's shoes and perspective take. And this is the biggest takeaway. They were far less likely to resolve their relationship conflict. Wow. So what is the ultimate result? We can't even resolve our issue here. It's not even possible in a sense. Like, we don't know that we're doing it. We don't know that we've made it impossible because we don't feel well. And so that's just highlighting one snippet. To dive even deeper, two things. Number one of the craziest studies that I break down in Eat Smarter, I'll just give the summation of it. Researchers were tracking. Matter of fact, I'm going to come back to that. Yeah. I'm going to leave that for the action step that we can do. Okay. This is why I wrote the book. All right. Researchers at Oxford University want to find out whether or not our nutrition affects our behavior and specifically violence. All right. And I come from an environment, I've lost many loved ones to violence. I've participated in that violence. I was kicked out of high school for a year. Wow. I graduated in 3 years of high school because I had to. I was taught to solve my problems with violence from the age of 4. All right. My mom pushed me into my first fight. All right. Made me fight like, like an animal, like, with the next door neighbor's kid. And so I was always taught that, but in a strange way, again, we're in that environment where you have to be, or you might die, So this really stood out for me. And I'm just like, why is we seeing on the news, there's constant conflict, there's constant violence that's taking place. And there is definitely these situations. These are the extremes though. We're not talking about the minute things where people not being able to connect and to understand and perspective take. And so they wanted to find out what would happen with a group of prison inmates if they improve their nutrition. And so we already have an assessment of what that looks like with prison inmates, which is, aggressive behavior, tendency towards violence. We already have a picture, stereotypes of what that looks like, which is, there's nuance there. But what I loved about the study, which is unfortunate, is the fact that it's a ward study, right? So everything is controlled. They can't leave and go to Whole Foods and get something different. They're tracking exactly what they're eating. And what they did was they went to find out what would happen if they improved their nutrition in a very rudimentary way by just giving them vitamins, minerals, omega-3 fatty acid supplements. And that's the part that I was going to come back to and talk about in a moment. And so they did that for one group, and then they had a placebo group, and they tracked them for 4.5 months. All right. So ward study, randomized, double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And this is a long-term study. All right, so 4.5 months, seeing what happened. They compiled all the data. The individuals, the inmates who received the increased nutrition had a 30% reduction in behavioral offenses versus the people receiving the placebo. It's incredible. 30% is remarkable. But the biggest thing was there was a 37% reduction in violent offenses simply by giving them more nutrition. They didn't know that this was happening. And the study results were so shocking. Another set of researchers was like, this can't be possible. We've got programs, we've got interventions, we've got classes, we've got books, we've got isolation techniques, we've got, different prison metrics. Nothing has gotten results like this, not even close. Food, nutrition, unbelievable. So they repeated it. Got almost the same results, about 34% reduction in violent offenses. And this was published in the journal Aggressive Behavior. And so bottom line is our nutrition impacts our behavior massively and our proclivity towards violence. The question is why? This is, again, this stuff is very simple. This isn't we don't know. It really has to do, number one, with how our brain works, right? So we've got the prefrontal cortex, and this is the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, for social control, for distinguishing between right and wrong. That part of the brain itself, the human brain, is the most energy hungry organ in our body by far. It's only 2% of our mass, but it consumes 25% of our caloric intake. And it gets first dibs at any nutrients that come in. And in the brain also, it can starve very quickly, in a sense, because there's many key nutrients. And the brain has its own diet, by the way. We call it neuronutrition. The blood-brain barrier only allows certain things in. But when the part of the brain, first of all, what happens is when you're deficient in these key nutrients, we kind of devolve, the amygdala really starts to become more active. And we see this same thing with sleep deficiency. So researchers at UC Berkeley took some brain scans, and they found that just one night of sleep deprivation led to the prefrontal cortex, quote, going cold, right? So the activity dramatically reduced in the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala was lit up like a Las Vegas stripper sign. It was lit. And so we call it an amygdala hijack. And so that part of the brain is much more reactive, much more geared towards survival of self. It has positive, aspects to it, but it's not your ability to be okay, if I do this behavior, this negative outcome might happen. Let me not do that. So that gets hijacked and you start being more reactive. And so that's what they're seeing in the data. Now, this is the last part of it was, and this is a study that I broke down in the book, these researchers found that the people who had the lowest intake of DHA and EPA had the high, and they used MRIs to actually look at the brain. They had the highest rate of brain shrinkage. Wow. And the bare minimum, the border was just about 1.2 teaspoons a day of DHA and EPA. Led to this accelerated brain shrinkage, which this is terrible. Like you're literally losing brain mass. And this is associated with all manner of psychological distress and metabolism distress because your brain is controlling so much of this stuff. And also the other thing that's well noted now is that essentially the bigger our waist size, the smaller our brain gets. All right. And so literally we have folks who are out here in the world thinking they're communicating with other people, but we're not really even able to access our higher level reasoning and our function and our logic and our ability to distinguish between right and wrong. We're hyper reactive. Whatever we believe tends to be something we really latch onto because that's the activity of the amygdala and the limbic system is like certainty, certainty, certainty. And so when I know some folks listening right now and watching, they wonder like, well, we got this data here. Like there's this very well-constructed randomized controlled trial finding this outcome here in relationship to this current virus. Why won't my parents understand this? Or why is my best friend saying that it's not true? Really, we're in a state right now where the majority of our citizens, functionally speaking, are not well. Let me make sure this is clear. It's not that we can't have compassion when we're not well. It's not that we can't perspective take. It's just harder. I know this from firsthand experience. I'm infinitely more compassionate and patient and understanding and aware of my biases so that I can look at data rationally and be able to look at the other side of the equation and come to a rational, logical response. It's not easy for the average person to do that now because they're just not functionally capable because their brains are literally starving. Their biology, it can't possibly do what it's designed to do. And we have to fix this issue, whether they realize it or not. We could just remotely, covertly get better nutrition into people. And all of a sudden, conversations are easier. It's easier to perspective take. It's easier to have empathy. It's easier to understand you don't know everything. That's at the end of the day, one of the biggest gifts here in all this whole equation is understand this is all an adventure. It's all like we're an internal student. And if you ever think you've got it figured out, oh my goodness, like you got a long way to go.
Totally. Man, I love that. I think people are going to hit the replay button to learn more about that. And I remember one study was looking at, it was inmates in Australia, somewhere in Australia, but they looked at red blood cell EPA DHA and correlated it independently with higher prevalence of violent crime. And so you look at this, you're like, because right now, gun violence is a hot button political topic. It's polarizing a lot of people, just like the virus has. And the solution is like, hey, let's just take away guns. Let's make it harder. And I think, gun access should be, it should be regulated and everything. I personally own firearms and everything like that. I don't like the idea of the government coming in and taking everyone's guns because criminals, don't like to ask for permission to get guns, right? But if we can make people have better thought processes, like you said, should I pull the trigger? Should I do this or that? I mean, the person that's going to go mass shoot someone, they could drive in their car and mass run over people. Like, what's to stop violence anyway? So if violence is a problem, if nutrition is related, like you talked about, in many different ways related to violence, that seems like a more upstream way to quell some of the violence by helping people to realize that maybe I shouldn't participate in this crime, or I'm hanging out with the wrong people, or, is it worth the consequences, right? But this system is so intertangled, man. And so I guess where I wanted to go with this is, where do we start? Because you have all these companies that have the political action committees that are rubbing the back of a politician. Is it the media? I think the media could do a good job. Question, do you think the media, because look, they've made a stink out of face masks. Everyone is wearing face masks, right? So if they were to get involved, that could help people. But you talked about, events and speaking out in the public, podcasts like this. Because let's face it, I mean, the people that are making the crappy food, they need those jobs too, right? So it's so interconnected, man. Like if you could wave your magic wand, how would you fix it?
Wow. You said one of the most, it's really tough because I've done the media stuff. Like I've been on the shows and, the major television, all that stuff. And it's, for me, part of me knows it's a complete waste of time because of, like, a lot of times, if I'm on the news, for example, people aren't tuning into that for that. They're tuning in to be afraid and, or, find out what LeBron James did, but I do realize the majority of people are getting, that's how they're being spoon-fed what to believe. And so having more efficacy in that medium would change a lot really quickly. But here's the reason why I hesitate to talk about it is that it's not the only way, because that system has really doubled down on their polarization. Mm-hmm. They've doubled down on all of it because more and more people are realizing that it's happening. So it appears to be, and it does, again, it seems to be running the show right now, but truth surfaces, and mediums like this, podcast mediums, YouTube, the ability for researchers and scientists and, just everyday folks to share their opinion and share their perspective it's miraculous right now. But here's the rub. And we talked about this earlier. It's incredible that everybody has a voice, but it's also a problem everybody has a voice because most folks don't realize the responsibility that carries. So I'm just not out here haphazardly, just like, whatever sucks and this is a lie and all this stuff. No, I actually, every single day of my life, and I've been in this field for almost 20 years, every day, I have to stop myself. I'm so obsessed with it. Let me not say every day, 6 out of 7 days, sometimes 7. I'm researching. I had a clinical practice for over a decade. I worked as a strength conditioning coach for 15 years. Research scientist, all of my projects in school and all these different things. I have a proclivity towards understanding the language because this is the thing. Like even when I mentioned the study earlier, this is a prestigious peer-reviewed journal, but it's not written in the language that most folks can understand. It's written in the language of academia, which is oftentimes for more academics, for them to just talk back and forth amongst themselves. And, here's an important fact. It takes on average, once we have, we'll just say again, a randomized placebo-controlled study proving the efficacy of
fasting or whatever.
Right, fasting or curcumin, bioactive in turmeric. This has anti-angiogenesis properties. So it's able to selectively, essentially cut off the blood supply to cancer cells. And this isn't just me blowing smoke. And first of all, we have peer-reviewed data on this, but also I know the founder of the Angiogenesis Society, the Harvard researcher, Dr. William Lee, is a friend of mine. This is real. But it takes on average, once we have that proof, it takes on average about 17 years for it to get utilized in a clinical setting. It doesn't, in the age of the internet, it makes no sense. But that's how slow education system changes. And so what this enables us to do is to get the data out quicker, being able to decipher this language, because it's a language, and making it make sense for folks who can utilize it now, because what they're being inundated with is not helping. Matter of fact, it's made everything worse. I'm just a big proponent of results. Yeah. Are we good? Just how is our society doing right now? Like, are things getting better? Have things gotten better? And the answer is clearly no. Everything is continuing to get exponentially worse, but there's this groundswell of people who are the healthiest ever. Like but what does that get back to? And that's the crazy part, is that it's such a level of simplicity to it. And I used this term earlier when we were talking, what do my genes expect me to do? Right? Because we don't have everything figured out. We don't. Our ancestors figured some things out that got us here. And they've got some catalogs. They've got some data on these things. We're using new scientific method to affirm those things. But did they have everything figured out? No, of course not. But they had some really good tendencies. And if you even understand, our genes, these epigenetic controllers, there's nutrigenomics, nutrigenetics. These are my passions. Like, how does each bite of food that we eat impact our genetic expression? right? And what does our genetic expression want from different foods, right? That's both sides of it. And understand the power that we have at the end of our fork, right? But then it's a step even beyond that I don't talk about often, which is in the context of, there's a rumble there. Sorry.
A little bit, I heard it, yeah.
Okay. In the context of eating and nutrition in relationship to food, just the thought of food, thought of food elicits all of these biochemical changes. So even before the food even gets to your mouth, you're changing what your genes are doing based on your perception. Like these are the places. So if I could wave a wand, number one, it's already happening. These mediums, and they're so powerful. Most people, the majority of US citizens are listening to podcasts now.
Right.
Now there's some shitty podcasts, of course, that are talking about ridiculous things, but then there's some really great stuff, and the cream tends to rise to the top. We've got to leverage that right now, though. We've got to make sure that is sustainable and keep bleeding over into other things. And that's what I've used to bleed over into being on daytime television and all these things. For me right now, I've really backed away from that because I see like the actual leverage there is so small. It's just, I rather focus on things and I can spark the minds because, here's the crazy thing. And you know this too, you never know who's listening.
Yeah.
I've got the craziest people, like Gold Glove winning all-star baseball players listen to the show. I'm also friends now, #1 country artists in the world, all these different things. Like I never know who's listening.
That's cool.
And with that said, I have so many news anchors who listen to my show, right?
To curate their own content, probably. Wow.
And it starts with that, like that accessibility, making it available and letting that filter down. And with that even said, the policymakers, whether it's local, state, whatever, those folks finding me, listening to the content that I'm creating, that can help with those systems. My mission, my goal, and I know you're the same, is like, I want to educate leaders. I want to help leaders who then go and make massive change in their own domain.
Yeah.
Right? That's really why I feel like I'm here right now.
I love that, man. Yeah, the ability to have that ripple effect. Yeah, because you can't be everywhere all at once. I love that. One of the things that, you've done a lot of great work, but when I think about, like, when I tell people about you, your documentary on masks comes to first thing to mind, like, you got to check this out, right? Because I know, look, and we're going to rub people the wrong way, even mentioning anything about masks, because it's very polarizing. Let's talk about your mindset. Why did you... Were you skeptical of like all public masking and then you dove into it? Like what sort of triggered you to investigate it? And then what did you end up finding?
Yeah. So I thought it was logical to use a mask. I thought it was, like, of course, we put that on to help to stop the spread of, your aerosols, droplets. I just thought it was very logical. But that can be a big fallacy in science, just assuming that thing is true. And so I was just kind of, just taking it as it is. And then when I started to, for me, it was, and I shared this with you, my son, my youngest son, and my wife told me that they were going to have a mandate in their school for if they're going to go back to school, that they're going to need to wear a mask all day. And I'm just like, for 7 hours? Is that, is there any ramifications of that? Like, let me look into this a little bit. And so I went into the data and I looked at, first of all, I just looked at the effectiveness. Mm-hmm. Like, are there any randomized controlled trials on this? And there were a lot of them. And I was just like, wait, so we're being inundated. We're being told that this is effective at stopping the spread of infectious diseases. But here, and matter of fact, let me just share one with you. I've got it pulled up right here. This is one of the first ones that I saw. So this is a randomized controlled trial. This is published in the BMJ. Mm-hmm. It might be the oldest, most prestigious medical journal, British medical journal. So at least the oldest. So it's one of the top, it's one of the big ones. And it looked at the efficacy of masks to prevent viral infections in hospital healthcare workers in 15 different hospitals. Randomized controlled trial. So it's a specific implement looking at a specific outcome. This isn't an observational study. This isn't a comparative model. This isn't a theoretical model. It's looking in the real world what happens when I do this thing. And so the participants were randomized into 3 different groups. One group wore medical masks, AKA surgical masks, at all times. At all times. It's very important. Another group wore cloth masks at all times on their work shift. Then they had a control group who were allowed general practice, which included a couple people who didn't wear a mask at all. But most of the time, standard of practice is taking the mask on and off all day. You know, it's just like you don't really think about it much unless you're actually going and maybe doing a treatment or something. And so that's where people get latched onto, where there's not a control group that didn't wear a mask at all. All right. So I want to just give this as a given, but still they missed the point. I'm going to give you the big point of this study. And so here's what the study found. A percentage of healthcare workers in all groups contracted infections, but the participants wearing cloth masks had significantly higher rates of infections than the participants wearing surgical masks. In fact, healthcare workers wearing cloth masks were 13 times more likely to experience a viral infection than those wearing medical masks. 13 times higher by wearing a cloth mask. And for me, when I saw it, I'm like, okay, the big message is wear anything. Anything helps. Right? And I'm just like, whoa, cloth masks. People don't know this. And right away, a rational person would be like, maybe I shouldn't wear a cloth mask. Maybe we should be talking about wearing surgical mask and not cloth mask. But this is the coolest part of the study, is that the scientists in the study collected enough data to conclude that the wearing of the cloth mask can potentially increase your risk of getting an infection. Because even looking at the control group, same rate of infection with the surgical mask as well versus a control group. They didn't do any better, all right, who were just kind of like whatever about the mask. These folks had to wear it all the time on their work shift, and it didn't bear out any better. But the issue is the cloth mask. And so the researchers, of course, which is great, they ask why. And here's what they stated. When they were looking at why a cloth mask potentially increasing risk of infection, they said, quote, moisture retention and poor filtration may result in increased risk of infection in cloth mask, and that cloth mask should not be recommended. Randomized controlled trial. This exists.
Pre-COVID.
Prior to all the politicization of things, all the polarized nature of the data, this exists. Somebody tracked this to find out, does this work? And not only was it not effective in the clinical trial, but wearing cloth mask, 13 times higher risk of developing an infection. And there's a rational thing. And this is what really got me thinking about this. Okay, so I was just like, okay, aerosols and droplets, got it. But what happens if it's just crammed on your face all day? And what the researchers asserted was that it's basically creating a wet microclimate on your face and within the mask that actually makes it more permeable to virus particles going in and out of the mask, right? And plus you're just creating a vector of nastiness on your face. And the biggest issue, the lack of logic here is, okay, so I saw the cool, like Kirlian photography or whatever kind of like where people are coughing and you could see the cough clearly doesn't go as far when people have a mask on. But you can also clearly see it goes up out of the mask, below the mask, out of the sides, and still goes through the mask. This is what we're lacking to understand, is that these virus particles are everywhere. They're all over your body. They're all over your face. They're all over your skin. If you got a beard, forget about it. I mean, the first person I saw in my neighborhood with a mask on outside, he had the long red beard. And I'm just like, bro, your beard has got, like, you've got a virus freaking fast food chain in your beard, like they're just living there, thriving, having a good time. So this is what's left out of the rational conversation, is that we have this very rudimentary understanding of what viruses are and how they operate in the real world. We have the hubris to think we can control them. Clearly we can't. We didn't. We've had the strictest mask mandates here and highest rates of infections. I have not been myself, I haven't gone anywhere. I wear a mask. Like if I want to go to Whole Foods, like I'm not out here like running through butt naked, bare face, like, I got my naked face out, I'm not doing that. But the data, it's not logical at all. As a matter of fact, wearing a cloth mask can be outright dangerous. And so here's the biggest part is, when these viruses are shooting out all over the mask and the environment like they do, which is there's nothing you can do about it. When we're talking about aerosols and droplets, we're still not talking about viruses. We're thinking, oh, this is how they travel. That's not how they travel. That's not the only way. They are everywhere, all over you, all the time. You cannot help it. They're existing in the environment everywhere. There are more virus particles here on planet Earth than there is anything else. More virus particles than anything else. And I want people to really understand this. There are like 10 nonillion virus particles. There's like 100 million times more virus particles on Earth than there are stars in the known universe. The known universe is big as fuck, all right? 100 times more, 100 million times more, sorry, 100 million times more. And this is, again, we're getting into this place of, well, follow the science.
That's the default answer when they don't know how to further the conversation.
And the fact that the science is incredibly limited, but it's framed like it's the definitive answer. And so the top immunologists, and I know some of these guys, like the top cardiologists, top neurologists, these are my friends and colleagues. They know less than a fraction of percent of about viruses. How many there are, what they are, the different types, how they work. They know nothing. But it's just framed like, oh, we know. We don't. And as a matter of fact, look at the results. Viruses are so much smarter than we are consciously. They're adapting. They're, like this is what happens. The mutations like this, I saw it coming from a mile away. I'm just like, okay, so all this is happening. Mutations are happening. We're trying to treat this one thing. How'd the flu work out? Right. How did that work out 80 years ago? It still happens. There is no vaccine. But there is actually, folks working in pharmacology who's like this universal flu vaccine to end all flus. It's just like, it's not logical. You're thinking you can't.
You're out trying to outsmart nature when really you don't really know what you're working with, maybe potentially.
Not even remotely close. Like so this is the point being this is the beautiful part as well, is that there's so much more to learn and to discover. And if we can embrace that, and take that into it. Like we don't really know. This might be a thing, but don't act like this is the thing and make people believe it so much so that they fight amongst each other when it's just not true. And even if it's just a little bit true, and this is the thing, there is data that says that masks are effective. But here's the problem, and I've went and I've broken down all these studies for folks. These are observational studies. One of them is the big one in the Lancet. It was a compilation of all the hodgepodge of all these observational studies. It says it right in it. An observational study is like literally seeing like, okay, there were 10 healthcare workers here. 9 of them didn't have on any protective gear. 1 of them did, and nobody got COVID. So, protective gear doesn't work, or whatever the case might be. It's just making assumptions based on something you observe in the environment. It's not a randomized controlled trial. We have something specific that we're looking at, specific intervention, specific outcome, which observational studies can lead to some good science. Overall, they're open to massive biases. You can start seeing what you want to see. And this, I was watching like a YouTube video, and then it's like this Lancet, like I saw this advertisement for masks, and then I saw the study that they were referencing. I was like, I'm actually going to take, and it took several days to go through all the references. I was blown away because it just continued to reject the assessment that the masks work all throughout the thing. Wow. And I went through, there's an insane amount of references. Yeah. There was not one single high quality reference. And on top of that, so many of them were, if you actually went and read the study, were saying that masks were not effective. And it's just embedded in the study itself. And so with that said, there is data that exists, but what does the majority of data say? What does the high quality study say? And the thing is, even with the high quality studies, you can go and nitpick that. What does it say though? Don't miss the point. 13 times higher rate of infection in cloth masks. Can we talk about not wearing cloth masks? Can we do that? Now, I got to share this, and this is why I'm grateful to talk to you, I did that early on, right? So I think it came out maybe in June. Yeah. And it took off like a rocket, right? And I didn't even know I didn't know it was going to be controversial. Yeah. Like, it was just science. It was just studies. It was just sharing the data in a way that makes sense, and also leading to like, what can we do, right? Which is focus on reducing our susceptibility to infections in the first place. So anyways, but yeah, so there was it got taken off YouTube within 20 minutes.
That's
which
crazy.
Was insane.
That is so crazy.
And, it had millions and millions of views on the social media platforms. And of course, it takes on a life of its own. People start using it and cutting and pasting and all that stuff. But I'm not trying to do this to be right. I'm very comfortable with being wrong. I'm in a happy marriage So that means I am comfortable with being wrong. I'm looking for how I'm wrong. And so, but being that I'm doing that, I tend to be right more often because I'm willing to be wrong. And everything that I've been saying since the beginning has come to pass, every bit of it, because it's just logical. So where are we at today? This is the best, all right? So this was a randomized controlled trial conducted by the CDC. It's as if this doesn't exist, right? But it exists. And this is a study looking at people with confirmed cases of COVID, because even this study prior was like, well, that wasn't on COVID. COVID's different. It's a different virus. All right. So yeah, that study showed that masks weren't effective with whatever, influenza, whatever. This is different. We've got data on COVID now too. So this is a randomized controlled trial conducted by the CDC. And what they did was they wanted to find out why folks who were wearing masks, even though the mask mandates were happening, why they were still getting sick. All right. So they're trying to explain why that's happening. And what they did was they had a set of people randomly selected who had confirmed cases of SARS-CoV-2. But the control group, they weren't people who didn't have confirmed cases of SARS-CoV-2 alone. Like, right. So one group had confirmed cases of SARS-CoV-2. The other group were people who were symptomatic with something else. They just didn't have COVID-19. All right. So, but they were sick with something. So these are all, outpatient, it's looking at, okay, so they're sick. What is their mask behavior? And so what they discovered was in the folks who contracted COVID-19, over 70% of them strictly adhered to the mask mandates and always wore their mask. Versus folks who said they never wore a mask being just 4% of the cases. This is just randomly selected people, okay? Just randomly selected. In fact, if you combine the folks who said they always wore a mask with people who said they often wore a mask, that was 85% of the cases were in people who wore their mask. Wow. All right. Now, what the researchers were trying to explain is like, this doesn't make sense because masks work. There's got to be a behavior. And so they were tracking the behavior metrics, and they did find out that the folks who contracted COVID, they went out to eat more often. But it was not significant though. That's the thing. It wasn't like they're going out every night. It was a little bit more. It's something to raise an eyebrow versus the control group. All right. So that's the thing. It's like they take off their mask at the restaurant. COVID jumps into their, into their body like, Patrick Swayze in Ghosts, that whole scene. That's how. So that's what happens. It's the behavior of taking their mask off to eat. But it was still a small percentage. So they're still trying to explain it away instead of being like, wait a minute. All these folks they're wearing a mask, but it's not working. This is the best part. All right. The other group who were sick with something, they didn't have a confirmed case of SARS-CoV-2, but they were sick with some other type of infection, whether it's a bacterial infection, viral infection. They didn't go out to eat as often. All right. Here's what happened with these folks. Almost 75% of these folks strictly adhered to the mask mandates and always wore their mask, yet they still got sick with something. Wow. Versus just 3% of the people who said they never wore a mask getting sick in that group. And what's really overlooked in this whole study, so first of all, even though they weren't going out to eat, they got sick with something. What's overlooked in this whole study is that versus the control group, the group of people who contracted symptomatic cases of COVID-19 were far more likely to have at least one pre-existing chronic disease. Not far more likely, statistically significant, more likely. All right. So COVID likes those pre-existing chronic diseases. All right. And so instead of it just acknowledging, hey, this mask, because what people think in the media is that people are just out here, it's the anti-maskers, it's the super spreaders. That's why people who are wearing their masks are the ones getting sick more often. They're the ones getting tested. They're the ones. It's just logical. Most people who are just living a healthy life, they're not running out and getting tested. They're okay. If they get sick, hey, go get tested. But most folks are the people who are paralyzed in fear. They're wearing their mask all the time. They're going and getting tested and they have COVID. That's where all the numbers are coming from. It should just seem logical, But now, no, we actually have data on the fact. So it's framed as and that's the thing that people try to explain away. When they say, well, look, there's a mask mandate here, but the rates keep going up. The deaths keep going up. It's the anti-maskers.
Yeah, they're driving everything. Yeah, even in a place like LA or wherever where there's a high compliance of that. But, you know, the Danish study came out a little bit later than your documentary. And that was, I mean, as in terms of an randomized placebo-controlled study, I mean, that was probably the most controlled. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. And this is a thing too, like just right out of the gate, there was this pushback that there isn't a population study that's done using a randomized controlled trial. And then once one was done, then people just, instead of acknowledging the big takeaway from it, they just start to like, well, what about this? Negate the data. Because basically they gave a certain percentage of this population. And this is the part about it, why this matters, that this is a population that doesn't typically wear a mask. So it's an intervention that's new. And so the folks that they've given masks, surgical masks, and they were given instructions to, you know, make sure to exchange them, keep doing different ones. They gave them a bunch of them, right? So just to eliminate that as one of the, you know, potential factors. And then they have the control group who didn't wear a mask. After the study period, they compiled the data and they found that the folks who wore a mask versus those who didn't wear a mask, their rate of infection was not 30% more, not 3% more, it's 0.3%, right? Which is still, if you spread that out, it's like, oh, that could be something, but it's a micro amount compared to what you would think. And that's the big takeaway, is like, well, maybe this isn't that effective. For me, I dig deeper. You go actually read it in its fullness, analyze the data in its fullness, and sit with it. Think about it. We have a society now that are just junk information. They're scanning, they're finding the thing that they want. They're not thinking about it. There's a big difference. Everybody has access to data, but your ability to understand the data, you have to think. You have to actually take some time and think about it. And so digging deeper, there were many subsets of groups in the study. And one of the subsets was folks who they acknowledged strictly adhered to the mask mandates. They did everything right. And then versus the control group who didn't wear a mask at all, there was 0.1% difference. And people who did everything right, it was almost the same. I don't want it to be like that necessarily. Like, I don't care. Right. I just care what the data says, and are we doing something logical based on the data, right? And this is the other side of the equation, because for some folks, and myself included, it's like, well, if there's some degree of protection, like, then that counts. What's the trade-off? Are there any side effects from this behavior? This data was getting repeatedly, you know, early on, like people couldn't even talk about it. And now it's in the framing, but this data exists. So I'm just going to share a tiny bit of this really quickly. So yeah, this was a controlled clinical trial studied, again, controlled clinical trial published in the journal Antimicrobial Resistance and Infection Control. And it recruited healthcare workers to wear N95 masks while doing just low intensity activity. And the results were shocking. All right. So it's just taken as a given. You wear the mask. There's no negative side effects. These were pregnant healthcare workers as well, because the rationale why it was initiated was somebody had the idea, like, this N95 mask can potentially be, like, we got some data, which I'll talk about in a minute, showing that there might be some negative side effects. They have a baby. Let's investigate. Here's what they found. Wearing the N95 mask reduced their normal volume of air displacement between inhalation and exhalation by 23%. Wow. The volume of gas inhaled or exhaled specifically from their lungs each minute was reduced by almost 26%. The volume of overall oxygen consumption was reduced by 14%. And the ability to expire carbon dioxide was reduced by almost 18%. Now, I'm still going through everything, and I'm just like, and this would be logical, where they must have been wearing it for a work shift. This happened within 15 minutes. This doesn't have, when we talk about these kind of symptoms, these are symptoms of sickness. This can affect your cardiovascular system, obviously. This can affect your brain. This isn't a small thing. And so, you know, with the debunking, you know, that's one of the big things now, these fact checkers. Oh my gosh. It's amazing. It's
kind of comical at this point. Like, it bothered me, but I don't think it's good, but yeah, go on.
So that one of the big fact checking things going around is that there's no carbon dioxide we're breathing.
Oh my gosh.
The data exists. There's no study showing that it doesn't. There's studies showing that it does. It's just because it's inconvenient to you and the whatever is funding this whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I'll share these really quickly. All right. So another study, and this was conducted by the CDC, and this was published in the Annals of Work Exposure and Health, revealed that by wearing a mask, the highly thermosensitive, and this is directly from the study, by wearing a mask, the highly thermosensitive nature of the human face and breathing pathways can be inhibited, leading to increased anxiety, elevated stress hormones, false suffocation alarm in the central nervous system, and panic attacks. This was another report published by the CDC, and this was titled "The Physiological Burden of Prolonged PPE Use on Healthcare Workers." It exists. It details how N95 mask use can cause headaches, increase pressure inside the skull. That doesn't sound good. Reduce cognition, widespread activation of the sympathetic nervous system, increase anxiety, dysfunction of the cardiovascular system. I can keep going. This is just a small slice. Wow. All right. So just to think that, because, and the reason I'm bringing this up with the N95, there is more data affirming N95 masks specifically effective against some types of microbes, but there's a rub there. In one of the best studies found that if they're used intermittently, like their effectiveness is on par with surgical mask. But if they're weared
continuously, not touching it, okay.
But then we have to look at the trade-off. What is happening to their overall physiology by doing that? So I think there are spot cases where this is appropriate for N95 mask use. But to act like surgical masks and cloth masks are even remotely effective is just silly. And the last part is this. You know, if we just really look at all the data in its fullness, you know, it's just, for me, I would want folks to just do a simple cost-benefit analysis, simple, you know, risk-benefit assessment. You know, like, where's the trade-off here? Because we're just taking it at face value that this is okay, that this doesn't cause side effects. And so instead of our policymakers to acknowledge that the data exists, that this isn't a very effective implement, instead of them admitting that, like looking at the data, because they're supposed to flatten the curve. The curve, it got more curvy and more curvy. It's like Instagram model. It's just more and more curvy. And instead of them acknowledging that the mask mandates didn't work, they doubled down on it, said double mask, triple mask. The shit didn't work, so just wear 2 of them. To make it, and this was in the words of the, you know, the big little guy, which was to make it more like an N95 mask, wear 2, wear double mask, surgical and wear. The purpose is to make it more like an N95. I just detailed what wearing an N95 mask for your kid at school for 7 hours a day, what this is doing to their biology, the damage that it's causing. This isn't a small thing. It's not, when we're talking about potential COVID ramifications, it's a very small, especially when we're talking about children. The risk there, very small. Here in the state of California, you know, just as early as September 2020, 1 kid, as far as their death certificate, passing away in relationship to COVID-19. That's not what the media will tell you. 1 kid is too much for me, though. I don't want that to happen. But they'll make it seem like, you know, indiscriminately is killing all these people. Children have this very resilient, and the question should be, why are they so resilient?
Right. We should, yeah. What futures of their body or whatever. Yeah.
And
there's probably a pool of like 19 million kids. Well, I don't know the numbers.
That's the thing too. It's like, but we just explain that away. And with that said, you know, that small percentage versus 100% likelihood of them being negatively affected by wearing 2 masks, or by wearing any mask for 7 hours a day just to get an education. We're not taking this into consideration. The biggest issue here is that what impact we're having for our future generation. We're literally indoctrinating our children to be afraid of other people. We're indoctrinating them with this belief that their body isn't enough or capable of defending itself. What does that actually do to their immune system? We know this. We have massive data now with psychoneuroimmunology, the psychosomatic effects, not just for COVID. There's data specifically with COVID, but all manner of diseases based on our perception of how weak or strong we are.
Yeah. Man, and that's why these conversations are important, you know, again, to get people to think about the unintended harm, you know. But yeah, I mean, it seems like nutrition is a foundation, you know. Have you been exposed yet to the virus or no, that you know of?
I'm sure I have.
Because you've been hanging out and doing podcasts and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the wheels have not stopped turning, for us. And again, it's not like I'm haphazardly out here. It's not even a possibility for me,
Right.
And I'm already more somebody I'm very comfortable with being alone and in a book and researching, and this is my passion, and teaching, from afar.
Yeah.
So I haven't really, been out here like super spreading, but the funny thing is, I've had incredible people here with me. For example, Dr. Stephen Gundry, who's wonderful researcher, New York Times bestselling author, all these books and that whole thing. But this guy's, I believe he's 70 or he's close. He's seen patients 7 days a week.
Wow.
Many of them have COVID. When he saw the data, he ramped up his nutrition, his vitamin D. He showed me some of the data when he was here. I was just like, wow, I didn't know that existed. Seeing this radically, 3 times greater incidence of severe outcomes if you're vitamin D deficient, and seeing the obesity issue with vitamin D assimilation, for example, just like all of these things coming up in the conversation. And so I'm seeing people who are actually really living this life, and they're thriving. And we can have much more of our population thriving if we're taking care of our health. Specifically, our bodies, our immune system. This is the big takeaway from today. Your immune cells are made from food. They're made out of food. It's what literally makes them up. So your neutrophils, your NK cells, it's all made from food. So do you have Cheeto immune cells, or do you have really robust, sustainable immune cells that are made from real things that your genes actually can acknowledge, and really make great things out of? So to say that this matters, or that it's a part of the conversation, it is the conversation. Totally. It's the biggest piece, the biggest tangible piece. Because talking about our mind and the psychosomatic, that's still a heavy conversation. But as far as a tangible, actionable thing, it is not even possible, it's probable. We have more than enough to shift our systems of food and our systems of, community wellness, to give people access to better food.
Yeah.
And to make it fashionable and to make it approachable and fun. And these companies can still make money doing the right thing.
100%.
It's just gonna take some makeover.
Yeah, but these conversations really help with that. I love that, Shawn. The one thing that I wanted to ask you, kind of the final question here, is you've interviewed a lot of healthy people and people that are leaders. You have a lot of connectedness here in LA and stuff like that. What's a recurring teachable thing that people share that you think makes them successful or stay healthy and avoid disease and thrive? Like you said, Dr. Gundry, it's almost 70. Is there something that you could pinpoint, like they all go to bed early, or they all walk, or they do, is there a few, characteristics that you want to talk about?
Wow. I mean, it's, you know what? I mean, it's just all the things, man. It's all the things. It's just it's the way that you construct your life. I think you know what the biggest thing is? They're not a victim. They don't feel like they're a victim. They feel like they have some sovereignty, some management over their choices in their life. So being able to manage getting high quality sleep and their nutrition and their movement practices. So it's all really a compilation. But I think that, as I'm thinking about it more, the thing that I'm probably seeing more of right now than I ever have is the emphasis on sleep. And there's been this whole coronasomnia thing, and it's exacerbated an underlying issue. About 115 million Americans are regularly sleep deprived. It's a normal thing. And we talked about the change in functioning of the brain as a result. But with this said, one of the biggest impacts to our immune system is our sleep quality. This is where a lot of the work is taking place. Let me see if I've got something pulled up here for you. So I do have one little bit of sleep data specifically on immune function, and this ties back to kids too. So this was published in the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology, found that sleep deprivation directly reduces the production and performance of your natural killer cells. One night, NK cells are very early on. This is one of the things identified. Kids have their NK cells are part of the reason they have this resilience. And so much so that the FDA had fast-tracked a drug to target our natural killer cells. This was way early. This was in April. And most people, I was talking about it. I was like, hey, Appalachian State University published some data here that just going for a short walk can boost your NK cell production and activity. Can we get a America walk, you know, like wear your mask, but also walk for 20 minutes. It's important. You protect yourself, protect others. Mm-hmm. No, the walk part, no, forget that. But it's true. And so natural killer cell production is one of the things that is known to be a natural killer cell is very effective at taking out SARS-CoV-2 infected cells, right? So our sleep, it's not just, oh, that sounds nice. No, truly, it is a master regulator of your endocrine system, your nervous system, your immune system. It's really where everything kind of gets retooled. You know, there's a lot of inflammatory, there's a lot involved with inflammatory cytokines. There are cytokines that are released during sleep that actually aid in going through your sleep cycles. It's not this very vanilla thing like cytokines are bad. No, it's all operating in a healthy system. Let's get everything in a healthy place. Because even with I think that this is overlooked a lot when we talk about this cytokine storm. It's not COVID doing it, it's your immune system's response and the intelligence of the immune system to have appropriate response. And there are so many things that are immunomodulators that ramp up the response of our immune system and even suppress it. There are things with our nutrition, our movement practices, our sleep, immunomodulators. They determine the outcome. It's not just COVID and, this cytokine storm. That's not what it is. And that's what's overlooked. So that would be the thing that I'm seeing the most, which is beautiful because sleep is so powerful, not just for our immune function, but also our metabolism and so many
brain health, memory. I'm with you. And how you age. People that prioritize sleep, they age better, I found. Yeah. That's awesome.
Definitely.
So sleep smarter, eat smarter. Do you have if people want to just check out your work, do you have like bonuses for those? Because I like to have people go through the website. I love Amazon, but if they can go to your website to buy it, I'd rather have them do that. Where should they find your books at?
Perfect. Thank you, man. That's a great question. I don't even mention this very often. I shouldn't mention it more, but go to eatsmarterbook.com. Okay. Eatsmarterbook.com. There's a free 10 video mini course.
Sweet. That
we put together, my team and I, and it's great. Like we're in the video, we're going through 10 foods that have some of the most peer-reviewed evidence on affecting, kind of modulating, supporting our fat loss related hormones and neurotransmitters. But there are no foods that are magic bullets, but these have been found to be supportive of the process, right? So there's 10 of those, 10 videos. So go to eatsmarterbook.com and get the book from whatever retailer there. And then you get access to that 10 video mini course as well. So eatsmarterbook.com. And people, where they're listening to this, they can find my show as well. It's called The Model Health Show. And The Model Health Show also on YouTube as well. And so we just really care a lot. We've talked about this before. We're really about quality over quantity, really doing our homework, really operating from a place of giving and sharing and inclusion. And also, at the end of the day, making it entertaining and fun and empowering to learn about this stuff so that we can really transform society.
That's cool, man. Yeah, your show started, 2013 or?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Cool. It was, you've been out there for consistent, because people have come and go, like you've seen in the space. Yeah. And you're consistently up there, like top 30 in all of iTunes, which is great. Man, I just got to say, in closing, I really appreciate the courage that you have to put, because a lot of people are scared about, well, if I question the narrative, what's that going to do to my brand? And you've been consistently just supporting the truth and ration. So I just want to thank you for that, because we need more strong men in our society to empower other people to start thinking. I mean, this blind obedience, dude, it's really not good. So I just want to commend you for that. And thank you for inviting me out here and coming on the show.
It's my pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Well, my friend, that's it for today. And I can officially call you a nerd now, because you've listened to 140 minutes of geek talk. And so I'm just grateful that you were still here. Hopefully you enjoyed that content. If you did, you can take a screenshot of this and share this over on Instagram. Be sure to tag me, Shawn over on Instagram. He does a lot of great stories and posts there for you. If you want to share some feedback in iTunes, you could do that. And if you're here on YouTube and you're still digging this, you can hit that like button. And again, let's spread the word. Let's spread the message. You heard from someone who had eaten processed food up until he had a bad injury and completely changed his life and his mind and his thinking and his impact on the world by changing the nutrients that he ingests on a daily basis. So we all have the power to spread this message loud and far, that we can change our health, our thinking, and humanity in our community. So let's make that message loud and clear. I'm grateful for you. Have an awesome rest of your day, and we will catch you on a future episode down the road. Bye now.